Have you ever stopped to think about why certain things bother you more than they should? A message that takes too long to be answered. The tone of someone's voice that shifted slightly. A silence that lasted 1 second too long. An expression on someone's face that you can't quite read. None of that is a real threat. None of that represents concrete danger. And yet the system reacts. A slight internal contraction. A state that shifts. An attention that immediately narrows toward the stimulus, as if there were something to be evaluated, as if the situation demanded more than the moment calls for. And the most unsettling part is not that this happens. It is that it happens before you notice, before any conscious thought forms, before you have the chance to assess whether it makes sense or not. The system has already moved, already classified, already responded, and you only find out afterward. When you notice you are slightly tense without knowing why. When you realize your attention got caught on that detail for longer than it should have. When you feel that something is wrong without being able to name what. This is not hypersensitivity. It is not emotional overreaction. And it is not something you chose. It is a classification system operating with a calibration that no longer matches the environment you live in. A system that was built for a world of physical and unpredictable threats. And that now applies that same logic to everything, to text messages, to facial expressions, to pauses in conversations, to moments of silence that mean nothing concrete. There is a structure in the nervous system at the center of this process. You have probably heard the name, the amygdala. But what most people don't know about the amygdala goes far beyond what is usually said. The amygdala is not simply the fear center. It is far more sophisticated and far more consequential than that. It is an emotional relevance processor. Its job is not only to detect fear, it is to continuously evaluate everything that arrives through the senses and decide in fractions of a second one single thing. Does this matter to my survival? Not in philosophical terms, in immediate and concrete terms. And when the answer is yes, even if that yes is based on learned patterns rather than real threats, it fires. It activates the system. It directs attention. It begins to prepare the organism for a response. All of this before consciousness. All of this before the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational thought, has the chance to evaluate the situation. There is a concept that describes this process with precision. It is called amygdala hijacking, described by psychologist Daniel Goleman, drawing on the work of neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux. It occurs when the amygdala takes control of processing before conscious reasoning can intervene. The response happens. The body reacts. The state changes. And only afterward does the conscious mind arrive to try to understand what occurred. Often it arrives too late to change the state that has already been established. And frequently it arrives with a different task. Not to assess whether the threat was real, but to find a justification for the state that already exists. This creates something most people experience but rarely name. The feeling that something is wrong, followed immediately by the search for a reason for that something. As if the mind needed to explain the state. As if the absence of an explanation were unacceptable. And when the mind cannot find a clear reason, it creates one, or amplifies one that was already there. And so the state sustains itself, not because there was a real threat, but because the classification system fired before rational evaluation could take place, and the mind did what it always does. It tried to make sense of what the body was feeling, but there is something even more specific behind all of this. Something that explains why the amygdala fires so easily, why the activation threshold becomes so low, and why completely neutral stimuli begin to be processed as relevant. It is something that has been building over time, layer by layer, experience by experience. In a way, the system does not easily forget, and that fundamentally changes the way the world is perceived. Mental clarity. Video Euro 57. Everything feels dangerous. Translation Block 2 of 4. The nervous system has a characteristic that tends to go unnoticed. It does not only record experiences, it adjusts its parameters based on them. When something unexpected happens, when a situation that seemed safe revealed something different, the system updates, not consciously, not in a way you decide, but functionally. It calibrates the activation threshold downward. It begins to react sooner, with less stimulus, with less certainty that there is something real. Because from the system's point of view, erring on the side of excess costs less than erring on the side of absence. There is a principle that governs this process. It is called negativity bias. The tendency of the nervous system to give disproportionate weight to negative experiences, potential threats, and risk signals compared to positive or neutral experiences. It is not a flaw, it is a design feature. In the environment where the nervous system was shaped, an error of positive assessment could be fatal. Assuming the bush was not hiding a predator when it was, there was no second chance. So the system learned to weigh the negative more heavily, to treat ambiguity as risk, to interpret the unknown as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. And this principle did not stay in the evolutionary past. It operates now, in the workplace, in conversations, in messages you reread more times than you should, in facial expressions you analyze for far longer than the situation calls for. But here is something that completely transforms the way of understanding this pattern. Negativity bias does not only operate on clearly negative experiences, it operates on ambiguity. And ambiguity, for the hypervigilant nervous system, is synonymous with potential risk, a silence that could mean many things. Will be interpreted as the most threatening possibility. A neutral response that could simply be a neutral response. Will be read as coldness, rejection, or a sign that something has changed. A quiet moment that could simply be a quiet moment. Will be perceived as the calm before something happens. The system is not being pessimistic. It is not being irrational. It is being exactly what it was programmed to be. A threat detector that prefers false positives to false negatives. And when that detector is operating at elevated sensitivity, everything that is ambiguous becomes potentially threatening. And in today's world, almost everything is ambiguous. Social interactions are ambiguous. Expectations are ambiguous. Relationships are ambiguous. The future is permanently ambiguous. This means the threat detection system never runs out of material to process, never runs out of something to evaluate, never fully rests, and there is a consequence of this continuous operation that is rarely named. It is called the cognitive cost of vigilance. When the system is constantly evaluating the environment in search of risk, it consumes resources, attention, working memory, processing capacity. These are not unlimited resources. And when they are persistently directed toward vigilance, they become less available for other functions, for creative thinking, for complex decision-making, for processing new information, for genuine presence in a conversation, for the capacity to feel pleasure in what is happening right now. This explains something many people experience but cannot locate. The feeling that the brain is always busy, but not with the things that matter. That attention is always being pulled towards something, but rarely toward what is right in front of you. That there is a background vigilance that never stops, but also never produces anything useful. Because the vigilance was not activated by a real threat. It was activated by ambiguity, and ambiguity has no available resolution. There is no moment when the system can say, "This is resolved." So it continues, evaluating, monitoring, consuming resources for a function that never reaches an end. But there is something even more specific happening at the level of perception, something that goes beyond the cognitive cost, something that changes not only what the system does with information, but what the system is able to perceive. Because a system in a state of elevated vigilance does not only process the world differently, it literally sees it differently. And that distinction changes absolutely everything about how to understand the everyday experience of someone whose nervous system has learned to treat everything as potentially dangerous. Mental clarity, video 057. Everything feels dangerous. Translation, block 3 of 4. There is a phenomenon in the neuroscience of perception that rarely enters conversations about anxiety or hypervigilance. It is called selective attentional gain. The nervous system in a state of alert does not only pay attention to more things, it pays different attention to the same things. Stimuli that would previously have gone unnoticed become salient, visible, loaded with meaning, not because they changed, because the filter through which they are perceived changed. Think about what this means in practice. The same facial expression that someone with a regulated nervous system would perceive as neutral, someone with a hyperactivated amygdala perceives as potentially hostile. The same tone of voice that would be interpreted as tiredness or distraction is processed as coldness or rejection. The same silence that would simply be a moment of pause carries the weight of something unsaid. The environment did not change. The filter changed. And filters, contrary to what it might seem, are not merely layers placed over reality. They construct the reality that is experienced. For the system that perceives, the filter is reality. There is no experience of the world beyond the filter. This has a very specific implication. A person whose nervous system has learned to treat everything as potentially dangerous is not exaggerating, is not being dramatic, is not inventing problems. They are living in a world that literally feels more dangerous, because the system that constructs their experience was calibrated to make danger visible, even when it is not there. There is a concept that deepens this even further. It is called implicit affective memory. Different from declarative memory, the kind you can access consciously and narrate, implicit affective memory does not appear as a recollection. It appears as a state, as a reaction the system produces before any conscious thought. When the nervous system was repeatedly exposed to situations where ambiguity resulted in something negative, where calm preceded something difficult, where trusting was followed by disappointment, it registers, not as narrative, as a response pattern. And when the present offers any element that resonates with that pattern, even if it is only a surface-level resemblance, the system produces the response it learned, not because it is consciously confusing past and present, but because the circuits that were shaped by those experiences are responding to what they recognize. This explains something many people describe but rarely manage to understand: the feeling that a completely new situation carries a weight that does not belong to it, that a reaction was disproportionate to what happened, that you know rationally there is no reason to feel this way. And yet, the state is there. Because the state did not come from the present. It came from a pattern the present activated. Now think about what happens when this pattern operates chronically. When implicit affective memory is being activated continuously, when selective attentional gain is directing perception toward potential threats in every context, when negativity bias is weighing every ambiguity toward risk, when the amygdala is firing before rational thought can intervene, all of this together creates something very specific. A subjective experience of the world that is fundamentally different from the experience of someone whose system is calibrated differently. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. And here is something that profoundly changes the way of relating to this state. This is not a matter of distorted perception. It is a matter of calibration. The system is doing exactly what it was trained to do, with precision, with consistency, with extraordinary efficiency. The problem is not the functioning, it is the calibration. And calibrations, unlike personality traits, unlike character flaws, are the results of learning, and what was learned can be updated. Not by decision, not by willpower, but by something far more specific, which begins to reveal what is actually available for this system, and that ultimately makes it capable of distinguishing between what is real and what is pattern, between what belongs to the present and what belongs to the history the system carries. Mental clarity. Video 057. Everything feels dangerous. Translation. Block 4 of 4. There is a question that emerges naturally from everything explored so far. If the system is operating with a calibration that has made almost everything potentially dangerous, what is possible to do with that? And the answer to that question begins with a distinction that is rarely made. The distinction between deactivating the system and updating the system. Deactivating is not possible. The threat detection system is a fundamental part of the architecture of the nervous system. It cannot be removed, it cannot be permanently silenced, and any attempt to force that silence, such as emotional suppression, Dissociation, or rigid control of responses, creates a different cost, more invisible, but equally real. What is possible, and what neuroscience documents with growing clarity, is the update, the gradual recalibration of the activation threshold. The updating of the associations the amygdala uses to classify what is relevant, and this process has a precise name. It is called prefrontal cortex-mediated extinction. The prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and emotional regulation, cannot deactivate the amygdala, but it can, over time, create new associations that modify the response, not by erasing what was learned, but by building over it a layer of different experience. Like a file that is not deleted, but that comes to be accessed less frequently because another file, a more updated one, is available. This explains why this process is not fast. It is not linear, and it does not respond to the effort of willpower in the way most people expect, because it is not about convincing the system. It is about exposing it to experiences it interprets as evidence that the calibration can be adjusted. Experiences where ambiguity did not result in threat, where silence was only silence, where the neutral expression was only a neutral expression, where the system slightly lowered its guard, and the world did not confirm what it feared. Each of those experiences is a small update, an incremental calibration, evidence the system accumulates, not consciously, but functionally. And over time, the activation threshold begins to adjust, not dramatically, but in a real way. What before fired automatically begins to require a little more in order to fire. What before was perceived as threat begins to be perceived as ambiguous. And what was ambiguous begins to have room to be simply neutral. This process has an additional name that deepens what is happening neurologically. It is called extinction memory consolidation. The system does not merely stop reacting to the stimulus that previously triggered the alert. It forms a new memory. A memory that this stimulus can be encountered without the threat response being necessary. And this new memory does not erase the old one. They coexist. But the new one, when well consolidated, has access priority, which means the system may still carry the old pattern, may still have moments when the old response appears, especially in states of stress, fatigue, or contexts that resonate strongly with the system's history. But those moments begin to be less frequent, less intense, less defining of everyday experience. And here is something that changes the way of relating to every moment when the system fires disproportionately. Every time you notice that the reaction was larger than the situation called for. Every time you realize the system classified something as a threat before you could evaluate it, that is not failure. It is the system operating with the calibration it has, with what it learned, with the best it can do given the history it carries, and noticing that, naming that, creating a space between the firing and the conscious response is already the beginning of the update, because what can be observed begins to lose part of its automatic force, and what loses automatic force begins to open space for something different, not for the absence of reaction, for the possibility of a different reaction, one that corresponds to what is actually happening, not to what the system fears might be happening. And that distinction, small at first, accumulates, grows, begins to change not only how the system responds, but how the world is perceived, how the people around you are perceived, how moments of ambiguity are inhabited, how silence can begin, gradually, to simply be silence. If something in this video sounded familiar, not because you have a problem, but because you recognized a pattern, and patterns that are recognized hold less power than patterns that operate in the dark, share in the comments if you'd like. A perception, a sentence, a word that stayed. Because what you can articulate about what you feel is already being processed differently, and there is a layer of this process that has not been touched here yet. Why the system, even when it begins to recognize its own patterns, even when evidence of safety is available, still finds something that resists the update, something that operates at a level even deeper than the amygdala, something that involves not only how the system perceives the world, but what it learned about what happens when the world goes quiet and the mind finally stops watching.